who couldn't attend. We're also going to mute everybody initially until the end, and we'll open it up to questions. But in the meantime, if you see the front screen here, Tammy's email at the bottom, tammy@infinitaskc.com. Feel free to email Tammy throughout the presentation for questions, and she can hopefully get some of those answered along the way if you can't wait until the end. We are going to have several folks on our team speaking today, so we're going to be changing throughout the presentation as we get to different slides throughout the deck today. So thanks for joining us. Today we're speaking about the latest generation of fiduciary failures. So most of you on this call may be clients. For those that know us, this is near and dear to our heart, right? Following processes and procedures is our passion. It's something that's very important to us. And so it's important that you follow procedures, that you follow processes, and protect yourselves as fiduciaries. As many of you on the call today are fiduciaries, maybe don't realize it. And hopefully after today, you'll realize just what's involved and take it a little more serious if you haven't already. So let's go to the next slide, Lauren, please. For those that don't know us, again, prospective clients perhaps joining us, this gives you a quick illustration on our firm. We've been doing this for over 30 years. Infinitas is the main parent company. Infinitas Retirement Plan Solutions is our retirement plan division. And as you can see from the slide, we've been doing this a long time. We have 146 retirement plans that we do service across all industries. That could be manufacturing, that could be nonprofit, education, retail, you name it, we're pretty much involved in it. We have over 1 billion in assets. So that is a big hurdle for us to pass. We did that 2 years ago, and we're excited to be on the up and up, continuing to grow. As a complete firm, the Infinitas team on the right, collectively, we do manage over $3 billion. We have 25 licensed financial advisors. And then on top of that, we have 30 support staff. So 55 people in our group are in Overland Park, Kansas. And that doesn't mean we only work in Kansas. As you can see here, we do work in 41 different states, including the District of Columbia. So depending on where you're located, we can help and service you regardless. And of course, we have been recognized in a lot of different accolades, social media, local and national accolades. So we're very proud of that. So let's get to the next slide. We'll jump into the agenda. A few things we're going to talk about today. One is the evolution of retirement plan lawsuits. So our speaker next is going to be Bruce, one of the owners of Infinitas. He's going to take you through kind of where things started back in the days with bigger plans and how they were being attacked and looked at by the Department of Labor and attorneys. And then we have other members of the team joining in. We're going to jump to the emerging themes of retirement plans. So where is this fiduciary status going? You know, it doesn't always stay stagnant. They look for new things to change and charge after, and our team's going to be outlining those. And then, of course, we'll follow up with best practices, right? Things you can do to help protect yourself, follow procedures. How can we set your plan up for true success when it comes to fiduciary status? And so with that, I'm going to introduce Bruce Glenn, one of the owners of Infinitas, one of my partners. Bruce heads up our employee education team. And of course, this is very near and dear to his heart. So Bruce, take over, please. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. Appreciate that introduction, and glad everybody's joined us today. So the retirement plan space certainly has evolved a lot over the last several years, and I've got a slide we'll kind of bring up here and share some initial thoughts here. In the beginning, when it came to compliance, it was more government-directed entities, Department of Labor, FINRA, SEC, these type organizations that override our industry and watch compliance. However, as the ever-evolving litigation world comes to be, in 2006, we started seeing the emergence of class action lawsuits. And these kind of come across the country, but they were initially, targeting the bigger companies, had thousands of employees and in some cases billions of dollars in plan assets. Examples of these, Lockheed Martin in 2015 had a lawsuit settled for $62.5 million. And then you had Caterpillar in 2010, 16.5 million. You had General Dynamics in 2010 for 15.5 million. And then you also had 2014 International Paper, 30 million. And these are just a few of those initial big companies that were kind of the big targets right at the very beginning. But throughout all these different lawsuits, there were common themes that emerged. And so some of those common themes were expensive share classes. So share class is a type of way of owning a mutual fund. So in some cases, there's as many as 14 different ways to own the same exact mutual fund. And most of those are considered to be a retail share class, where either you're paying commission up front, or you got the ability to get out of it, or you've got some sort of a hidden 12B1 fee. We like to work in the world where you have institutional share classes where there is no hidden fee. We don't get any kind of revenue sharing back from those funds, and the fees are transparent. They're on the statements where people can actually see them. And then excessive record keeping fees. So, not just the fact that they were charging too much, but in some cases, some of these lawsuits found that the record keepers may have been revenue sharing back, maybe to a third-party administrator or even to a broker dealer that was involved in the case. And then on another step in this area, improper investments. So in some cases, they had investments that maybe were proprietary, or they had a very expensive investment fees inside of them. So again, some big challenges you got to watch out for. The main thing is you can kind of guide through your process on the investment world with your investment policy statement, or we call it IPS. And failures in the IPS world can get you in trouble in a hurry. It's often said that, if you've got one, you need to follow it. Otherwise, you're maybe better off without having it. But failure to follow it without proper documentation, process, and procedures, and varying from that without documenting why you're varying away from that, can be a challenge. So then, nowadays, in the last several years, this lawsuit world that we're in has continued to evolve. And so it's no longer just the, thousands of employee type companies with billions of dollars. It's evolved down market to smaller companies, and it has evolved to different types of companies, not just 401k, for-profit publicly traded companies. They've moved more into the 403Bs, the privately held companies, multi-employer plans, defined benefit plan. That's more of a pension style plan bolted on top of a 401k, or maybe just be a pension. And then you also have ERISA exempt plans that formerly were kind of in the Wild Wild West, where people didn't pay attention to them, but now they are. Not only Department of Labor, but the big lawsuits are out there. Different types of plan sponsors have been targets as well. Like some privately held companies, universities. That's something that used to always be kind of hands off. Not for profits. Your charities, things like this can be targets. Financial institutions. We've even had some of our industry leaders in the financial world that have been sued by their own employees. In one case in particular, their own broker dealer wasn't using the lowest cost version of those funds, or that share class. So it's really widespread. Healthcare systems, some of these big, massive healthcare systems also, and more every day. So just be aware of that. And positions that lawsuits are getting targeted to also. It's not just the president or CEO. We're seeing CFOs getting sued, HR directors, benefit directors, and others. So you just want to make sure that you're trying to help your participants. But sometimes when you are helping your participants, you might even be opening yourself up to some fiduciary liability. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch about today. Next, I want to introduce our senior partner and founder of our group, Tim DeSetti. Founded the group back in 1990, and a very, very knowledgeable individual, one of the sharpest in the industry. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, my friend. That was very kind of you. All of us that are presenting today, we are also fiduciaries. We know that you likely serve a role as fiduciary, and when Bruce starts talking about lawsuits, understand that as a fiduciary of your plan with you, if you're a client, you understand the importance of why we think this is just as important as we hope you do. This has been one of our goals, to put on this fiduciary training program. This year, we have had in the past 401k day, and that has always been a successful event to try to educate you. But again, today aimed very much at being a fiduciary. I'm going to go into, as Bruce described, those large plans have come down to much smaller plans. The vast majority of the people on the call today are probably working with a plan that has 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, maybe up to $100 million in assets. That's what we define as the small market, here in the industry. But these suits have definitely come down to that smaller market. And so we want you to be very, very aware. I'm going to highlight 4 specific cases, and I'll begin with a case that has been going on since 2010 and just settled in 2019. Unfortunately, settled for a cost of $55 million in terms of specific penalties to this plan provider. And it was a pretty simple thing that occurred. This company, at the very top, you'll see references ABB. Most of us don't know who ABB is. So let me add some clarity. For those of us who are a little bit older, we remember the brand Westinghouse. Maybe we had a washer, a dryer, some particular item in our home that was made by Westinghouse. They are owned by ABB. Today, ABB is a massive technology company. One of the clients on the call today is actually a manufacturer's rep for some of the products associated with ABB, and they're very much into robotics and some contemporary things we use. Maybe we don't know we use them, but they're involved in our life. This particular company was a classic case of just mismanagement of the overall benefits of this company. ABB had paid very, very close attention to the cost of their health insurance, to their defined benefit retirement plan, their voluntary life program. They were very, very tuned in to making sure those were the best possible benefits they could be. I'm sure some of those costs were shared between the employer and the employee. And that's very much the case of a 401k. With the majority of plan sponsors, the costs are generally shared, but oftentimes the biggest part of the cost is really levied against the employee. And so in this case, they had not paid nearly as close attention to the costs and the performance and the management of the 401k plan, which was borne by the employees, as they had for those other costs. And so in this particular case, it started out with the payroll provider, and the 401k provider, a little bit of, I guess, otherwise collusion in some respects. The 401k provider indicated that if they would use their company for payroll services, that they would be able to help put investments in the plan and help bring the cost of payroll services down. And that seemed like a good idea to ABB at the time. Remember, in 2010, they were just coming off of the recession that began in 2008. And I think, difficult times, unfortunately, can lead to making poor decisions. And anyway, it's very important to note that they had a good advisor in this case. Mercer was the advisor involved. They were also, unfortunately, involved in the lawsuit. But it was proven out that Mercer had made the plan sponsor aware that there were less costly, perhaps a better value in terms of providers when it came to the retirement plan, but the company did not take the appropriate action. Unfortunately, it was deemed that there was some kind of a quid pro quo. In other words, this for that. Perhaps those payroll services and those cost benefits were blurring their vision as to what was the very best arrangement in terms of cost that was being borne by the participants. And again, I think Tammy's going to talk later a little bit about process as we conclude today. And she's going to remind you, as I will now, that the Department of Labor would like you to benchmark the costs of your plan approximately every 3 years. That means all parts of the plan. Christina will talk to you a little bit about those different pieces of the plans that you should be benchmarking. But in any case, $55 million was a massive suit. That's very costly to the plan as well. That was the penalty, not the legal costs over 10 years. So as you can imagine, that was a very, very hefty case and just wrapped up in 2019. The next case.
Tim, just to add a little color to that ABV to draw it a little closer to home. That case went through the Western District Court in Missouri. So it wasn't a big East Coast or West Coast case. That happened right in Missouri. So
yeah, the original law firm that launched the vast majority of these cases Bruce was referring to is based here out of Missouri. And so it's been quite the hub. And there are a lot of law firms that have now followed their process. And that's why it's coming down to small companies like Lametry Collision. I highly suspect none of us have had our car repaired at Lametry Collision. But I think if you see the size of this plan at $9.2 million assets and 114 employees, I think we all either run a company, know a company that's right here in your hometown, wherever you're at, that is a company that size. ABB was a massive company. Lametry probably felt very picked on when this lawsuit occurred. It was dismissed voluntarily for an undisclosed penalty, but I promise you the legal work and the costs of that were damaging to Lametry. The bottom line is it came down to the fact that they were not actively monitoring the investment options. They did not have a process in place, whether that be quarterly, semi-annually, or at least a minimum of annually. The Department of Labor wants you to look at those investments, apply a process which is described in your investment policy statement, and make sure that things like performance and fees are being managed. In this case, it's mind-blowing to me that they had a fund inside the plan that cost 324% more than an equivalent fund that had equal performance in an institutional share class. We've highlighted this term retail share class. And Bruce mentioned that, any given fund you can buy it many ways. A lot of funds have, as he mentioned, 14 different classes of fund. And when we say classes, it's invested in the exact same stocks and bonds, but it's sold in a different cost structure. I went to Quick Trip this morning for coffee, and I should have waited because we make coffee here at the office. It would have been a lot less expensive to do it in an institutional way. It's surprising how much things are going up, and that's true of investments as well. Institutional share classes of funds are coming down in cost. Today, the lowest cost mutual fund or index that we're aware of costs only 1/100th of 1%, and is a good performing fund and has to be evaluated against your other options. So again, I think 2 points: pay attention to your IPS, manage your process at least on an annual basis, and don't consider yourself immune just because you're a small plan. A more recognizable name in the next case that I'll highlight is Gucci. Don't have any, not wearing any, but obviously very, very aware of the company. $96.5 million plan with 2,000 participants, still a very, very common size. Hundreds of companies within 2 hours of where I sit right now are this size of plan. This was not so much about cost, although cost played a role. This particular case was about performance. What's always been amazing to me is cost is very definitive, and we can manage costs. That's something that seems very factual to us. Performance is somewhat less tangible and very difficult to catch. We've all heard stories of making, choosing, many of our participants choose an investment based on the most recent performance. That can often be a mistake. And so, really pinpointing and putting your finger on what is the best performing fund is a difficult, difficult task. As Tammy will remind you, it's not about having the very best fund. It's about having good quality funds that you're following a process to provide to your participants. And then the final bullet point, third bullet point on the slide, is be very, very aware of proprietary investments. Early in fact, I'll go to the next slide, Lauren, and talk about this particular case because it does highlight the proprietary use of investments. And it also, this case is focused on MIT, which is one of our great education institutions. Bruce mentioned that this started in the for-profit space with mostly publicly traded, privately held companies that were for profit. It seemed early on that the nonprofits were spared, but today churches, colleges, private schools, organizations that try to do enormous community services, you're not immune from the fact that you have a responsibility to your employees to provide a good, sound retirement program. Obviously, this is a big case because we all recognize MIT is one of the largest universities in America. They were using the largest provider and the most common provider to nonprofits in the country as a record keeper. That record keeper, as you see in bullet point 2, had 150 investments in the plan that were their proprietary investments. Early in the 2000s, the administrations through a couple of different presidents were very, very focused on these fiduciary processes. They pushed the Department of Labor for fee disclosure, transparency, and many of these issues. And again, that push is what led to most of these lawsuits. In the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, there's been quite a waning or a moving away from such clear fee disclosure and fiduciary Department of Labor processes. That has kind of created what I've described as a regression back to some less than perfect practices. So let me be real clear here. It's absolutely positively not illegal, and it's not a bad process to include a proprietary fund when it carries the same name as your record keeper or potentially your advisory firm. We don't have any proprietary funds. I'll remind you that we're an independent firm, so you'll never see that with our firm, but that it's not illegal to do that. But you do have to probably pay a particular bit of attention to making sure that investment under your investment policy statement provides a good performance as governed by the methods you're using. It is absolutely certain, you have to be absolutely certain that your firm, the costs of your record keeping, are not receiving some form of, in this case, it was described in the court case as an illicit kickback. That's an ugly term, but I would distill it down to the fact that, are you benefiting from the fact that you hold that proprietary fund? It's not illegal for you to benefit, but it's sure going to be a problem if that fund can't meet the tests that the other funds you're using in the lineup are using. And so again, at the very bottom of this, unfortunately, $18 million later and a lot of legal fees, MIT, I'm sure, has a much, much more sound process when it comes to their annual fiduciary training. Again, congratulations and thank you for being here today. For submitting an RFP and making sure that your service providers are disclosing these things. Some of them go undisclosed if you're not paying really close attention. But again, make sure that's clear, it's fair, it's equitable, and communicate that to your participants. With that in mind, I'm going to transition over and introduce Christina Strickland and Tammy Tetzloff, both of which important advisors on our team, and they also serve a very important role behind the scenes that you're probably aware of as well. Tammy is our Chief Operating Officer, and the most important word in that sentence is operating. She runs the operations of this firm. She's the one that keeps, she is the most important figure, at least gets the most acclaim in keeping us on process for you as a client or a prospective client. Christina Strickland joins us as well. I mentioned she's an advisor, but she also is our Director of Participant Services. And so in the end, all of these procedures, the effort that we all go to as advisors and plan sponsors, in the end, this is for the participants. We're trying to make a difference. We're trying to provide a benefit. We want our employees to retire with dignity. We want them to have a successful financial outcome. Ladies, highlight some of the positive things. We've all focused on the negative at this point, and not to scare you, but to bring you, make you aware that these things do exist. So what are the real processes that are going to keep us out of trouble here, ladies?
Thanks, Tim. I'll take it first. So now that we've done all the doom and the gloom, let's give everyone a sigh of relief and let them know that you're probably doing most of the things you need to do. You just aren't aware of it. So let's start off with fees. As it's been mentioned throughout this presentation, you're not required as a plan sponsor to have the absolute lowest fees possible. You just have to have reasonable fees and for the services that are being rendered. So basically, as the plan sponsor, you need to understand what you're paying for, what your fees are getting you. And then on an annual basis, you need to review those selected share classes that are in your investment lineup and the different available asset categories that are available that Bruce and Tim have mentioned earlier in the presentation. You need to review those annually because investment companies are always coming out with new and different share classes to accomplish different things. That is a service that's included in Infinitas's 321 fiduciary services that we have. So that's a service that we do for our clients. Something else that you need to do as a plan sponsor is to benchmark your plan against similar size plans. You need to kind of understand where your fees fall in line with everyone else. And then every 3 to 5 years, like Tim mentioned, you need to take your plan out for a request for information. Even if you're absolutely in love with your record keeper, it's just a best practice to kind of go and get a pulse on what the market's doing. Again, that's something that Infinitas handles for our clients. It comes back, and a lot of times the incumbent record keeper will seem a little bit high because they've got special discounts for those new plans they're trying to win. So we encourage everyone to go back to your service provider after you do this request for information and have them explain their pricing. There's probably things that they're doing for you that weren't captured in that request for information. And sometimes sharing that information with them will actually result in a reduction in your record keeping costs with your current provider without even having to go through a whole conversion process. So that's always an added benefit. And then from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about revenue sharing. So I'm going to start with revenue sharing is a very common practice inside of retirement plans, and it's an acceptable practice. So you're not doing anything wrong when you participate in revenue sharing. When revenue sharing first came onto the scene, it was very common if Fund A, if I pick Fund A and it generates 25 basis points of revenue, basically what that means is I'm generating $250 that goes to the top line for the plan to help offset those record keeping costs. And then Christina would pick Fund B, and Fund B doesn't generate any revenue. So she is going to not generate any extra revenue to offset those record keeping costs. So in the original process, I'm funding $250 extra for the record keeping costs, whereas Christina is not covering any additional costs. And at the time, that was the best they could do, and it was great. But now we're starting to question that. Is that a fair process for those participants? Is it fair to that employee that invests in a fund that generates extra revenue and so that they pay a little bit more in the record keeping costs? And if you've been in a meeting with me, you will know I say it is not fun and that's not fine. And there's another way to go about that. And that's where the revenue that's generated by my investment that I pick actually just gets credited right back to my account. And then all the record keeping fees are paid across the board. Everyone pays exactly the same price. Everything is fair and equitable and everything as well. So some things to be aware of, good tidbits. And now I'm going to hand it off to Christina to talk a little bit about the investment policy statement.
Well, I want to start by expressing my severe disappointment in Tim DeSetti this morning. He said Gucci, and he did not follow it up with the Meghan Trainor song. So stay tuned for that. Maybe in our next webinar, we'll get a song out of him. But
I want to see Tim dance.
Oh yeah, no dancing, just vocals, please, Tim. Next time, thank you. So we talk about investment policy statements, and here's the deal: those are kind of a blessing and a burden at the same time. So your investment policy statement, I'd like to kind of point out, is kind of like that lighthouse or that guidepost, the map, if you will, of, hey, here's how you need to run your plan. Here's how you need to pick your investments. Here's how we need to monitor those investments and make sure that we're still holding them to the same standard that they were the day we selected those funds. So we need to use that IPS as kind of a playbook, if you will. The problem that we have with some plans, or some plans have experienced, is that if you've set rules and said, if fund ABC does XYZ, then as a fiduciary on the plan, I will take the following action. The problem is if we don't do that. And so here's the thing, because investment policy statements are not legally required, it is a good idea to either actually follow it or don't have one. And so when I say actually follow it, though, I want to kind of highlight that third bullet point. There is, as always, we all are aware of this as adults in society, there is an exception to every single rule, right? We wouldn't have rules without exceptions. You can say, I'm not going to replace this fund, and here are the 3 reasons why I'm not going to do it as a fiduciary on this plan. And that's okay, because we documented, yes, we have an IPS. It does say that we do this. In this one instance, we deviated from that plan for reasons A, B, and C. And so providing that documentation is certainly adequate and will satisfy your kind of obligations, if you will. But at minimum, make sure if you're going to have one, you are following it, or at least documenting. If you're not, why aren't you? And maybe every year during your plan review or during an investment committee review, just kind of revisiting as a reminder, this is the criteria with which we've set up our plan. Revisit that, make sure that that's still the criteria you want to continue to manage your plan in, and make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page about how that works. And then, that's probably a pretty big chunk of a fiduciary's responsibility, but there are also some other 2 that I'm going to focus on. The next one is cybersecurity. And so, in 2023, we're all aware, if you turn on the radio or listen to the news or even just talk to your neighbor, you're always hearing about some sort of data breach somewhere, right? So here's the thing. 1, most of us on this call today are responsible for some sort of data at our place of business, whether it relates to the 401k plan, your 403b, whatever, or it's just employee files. Make sure that you've got an insurance policy that covers you in the event that personal identifiable information gets compromised. So, we love those HR files that no doubt have dates of birth and social security numbers and addresses and probably beneficiary information as well. So make sure you've got all that stored in a nice encrypted fashion, but that you also have an insurance policy that will back you up in the case of, heaven forbid, something happen. And here's the thing, not only you protecting the data that as a company you are responsible for, but also every vendor that you work with. So whether that be record keepers on your retirement plan, financial advisors, your healthcare team, whoever it is, you're also under an obligation to ensure that the individuals you've trusted with your employees' personal information, that they have a set of best practices and procedures that they're following as well. And here's the thing, I always kind of joke about this, about cybersecurity, that policies and procedures are written in crayon. And the reason for that is because it changes literally every single day. And so what you set up as your policy and procedure back when you were using AOL Instant Messenger is probably not the same process that we should be using today. So make sure on at least an annual basis, we're still updating those and making sure that we're keeping track of the best, not only insurance procedures, but also just the best safety and security technology out there. And then the other thing that as fiduciaries on a plan, we are largely responsible for, and it's a little weird because I'm a plan advisor, but here's the thing we need to watch out for. You picked your record keeper and you have a reason for it. You've picked your investments and you have a reason for it. We need to also make sure that we're holding each other accountable as advisors and fiduciaries. So to me, if any of you have ever met me in person, you know that I don't love the gym. However, I'm more likely to go to the gym if I have an accountability partner. And so I think of, plan advisors and plan fiduciaries as each other's accountability partners. It is our job as plan advisors to make sure that, 1, we're following all of the processes and procedures, but 2, that we could explain it in a way that, a junior in high school walking down the street could understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And the reason I think that's hugely important is because there have been cases where advisors have just kind of ran with the plan the way they'd like it to run, and plan fiduciaries, HR representatives, CFOs, presidents of companies don't necessarily understand. They just say, oh, well, that's what my advisor said. So here's the thing. You can't just assume that everything's running the way it needs to be running. You need to, if you're sitting at a plan committee meeting or a plan review, you need to understand, I understand we're taking this action and these are the reasons that we're taking this action and these are the intended results. At the end of the day, we all have the same goal, right? We all want all of the employees to be able to retire at a reasonable age and with enough money to live the rest of their life. And in order to reach that goal, we've got to hold each other accountable and we've got to work together to make sure that we're all still continually going to that same destination in mind. And so when you're looking at advisors, obviously, if you're, a client of ours, you know that we can act as 321s and 338s, but make sure that you've got an advisor that can explain everything to you, an advisor that is taking on fiduciary liability as well, and that you continually are asking those hard questions and making sure that you understand. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you don't understand and your participants don't understand why we're doing the things we're doing, or why this plan operates in this fashion, then we're not in a great place. So at the risk of sounding like a Debbie Downer, I think those three things are pretty important. And Tammy's going to give us a couple more tidbits on how to make sure that we're just doing all of that in a good and efficient manner.
All right, thanks, Christina. So I got the last two slides of the presentation. So we are in the home stretch, guys. You've made it. Hopefully we made the fiduciary training fun and exciting. I know it's always fun and exciting for me. So I'm going to start with, there are no regulations that require formalized fiduciary training and education. So there is no requirement that you have to do anything of this type. It's just a best practice. And we strongly encourage all of our clients that serve on committees of retirement plans to get some fiduciary training and education. Kind of helps you understand the responsibilities that you've signed up for. And the DOL is actually starting to take some interest in training as well. We've seen trending that whenever the DOL selects a lucky plan sponsor to get an audit, one of the things that they're asking for in their request for documentation is, okay, plan sponsor, list all the training that you've done in the last year. Again, not a requirement, but the DOL is kind of starting to fish around for it. So it's becoming a priority for them. And as we all are busy doing all the other things, how do you document your fiduciary training? Well, super easy. All you guys took time out of your days today to attend our training. Thank you very much. We very much appreciate it. Print out the calendar invite from this event, throw it in your 2023 plan fiduciary file, and move on. So you've just documented that you've attended some fiduciary training. If you're super excited and all gung-ho now that you've attended this session and you want some more training, well, next Tuesday on January 31st, we have an Infinitalks over the Secure 2.0 Act that just got passed just under the wire at the end of December. And there are a lot of changes in there that are going to impact retirement plans. So if you haven't got the invite, let us know. We're happy to send it. Some more great fiduciary training. If you attend that, print out the invite and throw it in your fiduciary due diligence file. Easy ways to get training. And then the final slide of our presentation is probably my very favorite slide of all. If you've ever been in a meeting with me, you've heard me say this. You probably have heard me say this multiple times. The ERISA law is a law of processes and procedures, not results. So ERISA doesn't care if you have the cheapest plan. ERISA doesn't care if you have the lowest cost funds or the very, very, very best performing funds. ERISA cares that you followed your process and you followed your procedures. As we went through all the various court cases throughout this presentation, the underlying theme is always, if you can prove that you had a process and there is a reason why you did all the things, as the plan sponsor, you always fared better. So the three most important things from all of these cases is you need to create a repeatable process, you need to consistently follow that process, and then you need to document the decisions that you made throughout that process. So when you get that annoying email from Infinitas saying, hey, it's time to schedule your committee meeting, go ahead and schedule that meeting with us because we're just trying to make sure you're following the process that you got set up. And then show up to the meeting. We'll be prepared. We'll bring the agenda. We've got a standardized agenda that we make sure we're talking about all the things you guys need to know so that we can continually remind you of what's going on and all the special language that goes with retirement plans. And then after that meeting, Infinitas will type up minutes and we'll create action items. And then we will consistently bother you until all the action items are complete so that you've done all the things that you need to do and you've you've completed all of your commitments. And then when we get together the following year, we're going to review those minutes and we're going to review those action items. So we're going to help you create this process, and we're going to take the scary out of the retirement plan so that if you should get sued for a lawsuit or get summoned, you know that you've done everything you need to do. You've got everything documented. And if you need backup, we've got everything documented. Just be sure to reach out to us. So with that, I will hand it over to David to close us out.
Tammy, thank you. Christina, Bruce, Tim, thank you so much. Wow, that was a lot, right? That was a lot to take in. It's a lot of responsibility, but for those that are clients, you know that we contractually sign on as fiduciaries with you, so we know we have you covered. For those that are not clients of ours, if there's things in the presentation that interest you, if you want to know where you sit in terms of compliance and your fiduciary obligations and where you're covered, take advantage of the complimentary fiduciary scorecard that we provide. We can help you identify holes in your plan if there are. We can help you find ways to mitigate and fix those problems if there are problems. You know, many times plans don't hire advisors, and I'm sure the biggest reason is there's a cost to that. But I don't want that to scare you away, because 9 out of 10 times we're hired by our clients and we actually save them money after adding our services, because we can negotiate your costs down with your providers. We can find you low cost investments that are high quality and basically pay for ourselves. So I don't want that to steer you away, but there is a lot to cover here. And then also we're going to be sending out an executive summary in an email format to all the attendees. So you'll have a copy of the presentation. We're also going to be uploading a copy of the recorded presentation on our website for future viewing. That is infinitaskc.com. infinitaskc.com. That is our website. And again, we're going to be opening it up for questions. So we're going to unmute everybody's microphone. Now that can be dangerous sometimes. So if we get any crossover, we're going to ask you to keep muted on your end if you don't have questions, but if you do, feel free to ask, or you can send emails to Tammy and we can get them responded. So let's open it up to questions, and we can probably throw a couple out there. Tammy's really good at this, identifying very common questions that we can answer for you.
You know, David, when Christina was talking about the vendors being a problem, you all may remember that massive credit card breach that Target had a few years back. That was actually caused by their HVAC vendor. This is a big example of a public situation that would really hurt Target in a big way. It wasn't even their fault.
So any questions from our readers and our attendees today?
Yeah, I just checked my email and I haven't got any questions emailed over to me, so I don't have anything at the moment.
Tammy, what are some common questions that we often get? Sometimes people are a little shy to ask, so let's throw a couple out there that might help stir some conversation.
A real recent question that I've had probably 2 or 3 times. I've got 2 of them actually. One is my Fidelity bond. Do I need to have one? And how do I get it? Anyone want to take it, or would you like me to answer it?
No, run with it.
Okay. So Fidelity bond, you absolutely need to have one. It protects all of your participants from the plan fiduciaries, plan trustees, taking the plan assets away. A Fidelity bond is super easy to get. You just contact whoever does your company business insurance, and they can usually just add it on as a rider onto your company insurance. It needs to be 10% of your plan assets, not to exceed $500,000. I've seen a trend in the industry over the last few years that once you set up that Fidelity bond, it just automatically increases and indexes to whatever the plan assets are. Some of the older ones don't do that, and you have to proactively go out and increase it as your plan grows. So definitely something to keep a good eye on.
Great.
Any other questions in the background from our attendees? David, one of the things that was, I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, go ahead, post me.
Yeah, David, one of the things I failed to really mention, was part of that ABB case, was the the fact that the plan sponsor failed to negotiate with its plan provider. You want to take 30 seconds and just describe, kind of some plan sponsors, they love their record keeper or et cetera. And so they don't want to feel like, I'm browbeating you just over fees or costs. You want to describe that just real briefly?
Yeah, excellent point, Tim. Sometimes it's hard to ask for price discounts from your vendors, especially if there's a good relationship. And that's where really Infinitas can help you, as a third party sitting on your side of the table. More than likely, we know your record keeper. And again, this is for non-clients I'm speaking to, but because we work with all of them. And we will take your plan to market. We will benchmark it. We'll make sure your plan is priced appropriately based on the services that you're getting and the size of your plan. And we will share that and negotiate that pricing for you on your behalf with your record keeper. It's not because you want to leave your record keeper. Maybe you do, but most often we can make changes and improvements within, so you don't have to leave your provider, but we can get that cost lowered to a much more reasonable rate. And it's very common. It's a very good process to go through. At least every 2 or 3 years, you benchmark it, but fees should be addressed every year, at least looked at and understood.
Yeah, all of your record keepers and your plan advisor, we understand that you have an obligation to your employees. And so it's only professional and it's only prudent that you negotiate those to make sure that you're not paying for a service you're not using, whether that be from your advisor or from your record keeper. So keep in mind that it's only professional and practical and appropriate to do so.
Tim, there's an area that's a little bit newer as far as compliance in our world. It's something we've always done, and it's going to be, revolving around education services. But, a lot of folks will have just the record keeper, may not have the advisor. And the problem is the record keeper, if they're sending people out at all, they're just sending out an enrollment person, and they're not maybe not be a fully licensed advisor, and certainly are not signed on to a plan as an advice giving advisor. And so we sign on as advice giving advisor on our plans. The reason for that is we can actually not just sit down with somebody and help them get enrolled in the plan, make sure they get the beneficiaries in line, but we can actually see if they're on track to retire. We've got some tools we can go through easy plan with them, make sure they've saved, where they're at currently, how much of saving, is it going to be enough to retire when they want to. But we actually sign on as that advice giving advisor. We can talk to them about anything of a financial nature to help them out, help your participants be successful. And that's a massive difference we see out there in the industry. And now the companies actually have to sign on as to what level of advisor they are or are not. I don't know if everybody's aware of that.
I think those are all good points. I'm gonna recommend that we pause just about 10 or 15 seconds, let anybody ask a question that might exist. And at the end of that, I'll wrap us up with a conclusion if we don't have questions.
So I had a question come in over the email, and the question was, if the plan sponsor pays all the plan expenses, all the record keeping costs and the advisor fee, is it still relevant to benchmark the plan every 2 or 3 years to make sure the fees are in line?
You want me to take that, Tammy?
Sure.
So the challenge is there, you would think because you're paying all the fees, it shouldn't be a problem. But the way that the governance bodies look at it is, if you're overpaying for this particular benefit, then you may not be saving enough money, or you should be able to save some money there. Maybe you could help the participants out on another type of a benefit. So they still want to see that you're not being frivolous with the monies from the plan.
I certainly think that scores points with the Department of Labor if they walk in and you do explain that you're paying those costs. I think it would be viewed as favorable from a Department of Labor standpoint. And they're probably just gonna, that puts you obviously in a good position. You're very unique by doing that. And then it hopefully that, obviously that doesn't take away from the fact that you still focus on the investment processes and the performance and those other functions that you can't pay for. The investment cost itself in every case I've ever seen has always been borne by the participant, because it's embedded within the fund that employee chooses, and it gives them some control over that cost. Many want to use a very low cost index fund, or maybe a more costly active management because it might outperform. But I think it's an admirable practice. I think it probably helps a little, but your point, Bruce, is very is an important one. It still matters. Another 10 seconds or so here. Any other questions?
I have permission to actually check my emails while presenting on a webinar.
Yeah, presenting. Okay. I'm going to wrap up with just one quick plug for next week. 2 presentations in 1 month is very unusual. We try to bring 1 presentation a month throughout the entire firm at Infinitas. But we had a major piece of legislation passed, as David mentioned. The Secure Act 2.0 is going to have 92 provisions that will be changing. The vast majority of those affect your retirement plan, or it affects your neighbor who may not have a retirement plan. So tune in next week at noon. If you haven't received that invite, simply email Tammy@infinitas.kc.com or reach out, through our website. Tammy's email again, right here on the center of the page. And we'll be covering that in 1 short hour. This was a successful presentation, 53 minutes today. Thank you. And then finally, David, you mentioned this will be posted to the website. We're also immediately following this presentation. This team is going to record a very short executive summary version. If you're co-fiduciaries, the other people on your committee, if you have a new HR person that wants some education and training, and perhaps they weren't on this presentation today, you want to simply share that with them, this is going to be a great resource. And our goal is about 12 to maybe 12 or 13 minutes to bring this presentation in an executive summary. So again, thank you for everyone today. And we look forward to working with you in a bright 2023.
Thank you.